The Meridian Grand Hotel had been built 112 years ago, and in all that time, not a single man had died inside its gilded walls. That record, Dante Salvatore thought, was either remarkable luck or remarkable discretion. He stood at the top of the marble staircase, surveying the ballroom below with the patience of a man who had learned, through blood and loss and a childhood that ended the night his father was shot across a dinner table, that the world revealed its truths to those who watched and waited. The Gala was a charity event. Children's Education Foundation of New York. $5,000 plates. Politicians in tuxedos that cost more than their constituents earned in a month. CEOs with offshore accounts. 3 federal judges he owned outright and 2 he was still working on. Beautiful. Rotten. His. Table 12 is ready, Luca Moretti said at his shoulder. Luca was built like a prizefighter and dressed like a diplomat. The particular contradiction that made him perfect for this life. Your name card's been placed. And the seat to my right? Empty, as requested. No one sits there. That was how it always went. Table 12, center of the room, perfect sightline to every entrance and exit. His chair at the head position, the seat to his right kept deliberately vacant, not because he expected company, but because proximity to Dante Salvatore was a privilege extended by invitation only. He descended the staircase. The room adjusted to him the way water adjusts to a stone dropped into it, a subtle, instinctive ripple of awareness. Conversations dipped. Glances skittered away before they could be caught. Senator Morrison laughed too loudly at something his wife said. Judge Harlan developed a sudden fascination with the centerpiece arrangement. Dante noticed all of it, filed it, moved through the crowd like a current, dangerous, invisible, inevitable. He was 10 feet from table 12 when he stopped. Someone was sitting in the empty chair. Not just sitting, settled, a glass of champagne already in hand, a small notepad resting beside the silverware, dark auburn hair pinned up with what appeared to be a ballpoint pen, doubling as a hair accessory. The woman was wearing a dress the color of a warning, deep, arterial red, and she was studying the room with the focused, cataloging gaze of someone who was not here simply to eat a $5,000 dinner. She hadn't noticed him yet. That alone was extraordinary. Dante stood still and looked at her. Really looked. The line of her jaw, the slight furrow between her brows as her eyes moved from face to face, not socializing, assessing. The notepad she thought was subtle, the practiced way she angled her body toward the dais while maintaining clear visual of the room's main entrance. She was working. Interesting. Very interesting. Luca appeared at his elbow, mouth already opening with the particular expression that meant, "Do you want me to remove her, Don?" Dante raised one finger. A fraction of movement. Luca went silent. Dante crossed the remaining distance and pulled out the chair beside her. His chair, the head position, the one every person in this room knew belonged to him, and sat down. She turned. Up close, she was more striking than the distance had suggested. Eyes the color of autumn leaves, amber gold and sharp as cut glass. A light scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose that was at war with the intentional sophistication of everything else about her. Her dress left one shoulder bare, and at the base of her collarbone was a small silver chain holding a pendant she'd tucked inside the neckline. Hidden. Personal, something she wasn't sharing with this room. She looked at him. He watched her register him. Not his face, she clearly didn't recognize him, but his energy, the way the air around him carried a particular quality of weight, the way the nearest guests had subtly shifted their chairs a few inches away, the way even the waitstaff moved around this corner of the table in a wider orbit. She felt it. He could tell by the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine, but she didn't look away. That settled it entirely. "You're in my seat," he said. His voice was low, conversational, unhurried. The voice of a man who had never needed to shout to be heard. She blinked. Once. Then she looked at the seat she occupied, then at the chair he'd taken, then back at him. "There's no name card," she said. "There doesn't need to be." Then technically, she glanced at the empty place setting before her with its pristine folded napkin. "It's unoccupied." It was reserved. For whom? He smiled. It was the smile that had made a crime boss in Philadelphia once excuse himself to the bathroom and never return. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that lived in the space between a question and a consequence. For me, Dante said. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, not of his face, but of the meaning beneath his tone. The slight shift in ambient tension around them, the way Luca had materialized 4 feet away with his hands loosely clasped, and his eyes doing a quiet sweep of the nearby tables. She was smart enough to understand that something significant had just occurred. She was also, apparently, not quite smart enough, or perhaps too stubborn, to simply apologize and move. She took a sip of her champagne. "This is a charity gala," she said pleasantly. "I'm fairly certain reserved seating was noted on the invitation, and mine said, Table 12, he said. Center seat right side." Her eyes narrowed very slightly. "Yes, that is not the center seat right side." He nodded to a position 2 chairs down and across. "That is." She looked. Color rose faintly along the high line of her cheekbone. She had, in fact, miscounted. The table was a round 10-seater and she'd settled into the wrong position entirely. She set down her champagne glass with the careful precision of someone refusing to look flustered. "My mistake," she said, gathering the notepad, smoothly, quickly, hoping he hadn't registered it. He had registered it the moment he walked in. "Stay," he said. She paused. "You've already opened the champagne," he continued, nodding to the bottle resting in the ice bucket beside the place setting she'd been using. "It would be a waste." She studied him with those amber eyes. He could see the calculation running behind them. The internal debate between survival instinct, which was screaming something at her, and curiosity, which was apparently louder. Curiosity won. She settled back into the seat. "Dante Salvatore," he said, offering his hand. Not his usual introduction. Not the clipped nod. Not the cold acknowledgement he granted strangers. An actual introduction. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done that. Her hand took his. Warm. Steady. Not a single tremor. "Aria Montclair," she said. Aria. Like music written in a minor key, he poured her champagne himself. Around them, he felt the entire table. The carefully arranged dinner guests, the senator, the art dealers, the 3 men from his own organization go very, very quiet. Dante Salvatore did not pour champagne for strangers. He leaned back in his chair, entirely at ease in the silence he created. "Tell me, Aria Montclair," he said softly, "what are you writing in that notepad?" The color at her cheekbones deepened, but her eyes didn't waver. "Restaurant reviews," she said without blinking. He looked at her for a long, long moment. "Stay close tonight," he said finally. "This city has a way of losing interesting people." It wasn't a suggestion. She must have understood that because she didn't argue. And when dinner ended 2 hours later and she rose to leave, she found, with a small shock, that the exits were not quite as available as they'd been when she arrived. Luca was by the coat check. 2 men she didn't recognize flanked the main doors. A third stood at the service exit with the particular stillness of someone who was waiting rather than working. Dante appeared beside her, jacket unbuttoned, expression pleasant. "I'll have my driver take you home," he said. "That's not necessary." "No," he agreed calmly. "It's not." He extended his arm. She looked at it for 1 beat. 2. Then she took it. Later, she would tell herself she had a plan. That getting close to him was the point. That this was exactly what she'd come to the gala to do. But as the black car moved through the glittering arteries of New York at midnight, and she felt the solid, dangerous warmth of him in the seat beside her, she understood with a journalist's instinct for truth that something had shifted tonight, something she hadn't planned for. "You're not going anywhere, Miss Montclair," he murmured as the city swallowed the car whole. "Not until I decide I'm finished with you." She kept her eyes forward and her breathing even. And she did not argue. Aria's apartment was the size of Dante Salvatore's coat closet. She knew this now, having seen both. She'd known it before, too. in the practical, unbothered way of a woman who had chosen a life of chasing stories over the stability of a steady paycheck and a rent-stabilized future. The apartment on West 74th had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was mostly a suggestion, and 3 walls covered floor to ceiling in a mosaic of photographs, printed articles, red string, and handwritten notes that constituted 2 years of obsessive, painstaking investigation. It was the wall she'd been most careful about hiding. Her laptop lived on the kitchen table. The external hard drive lived in a hollowed book on the shelf. Anna Karenina, because even grief had a dark sense of humor. The originals of the most damning documents. Surveillance photographs, financial records, a partially redacted police report lived in a fireproof safe under her floorboards. She was a journalist. She was also, secretly, something far more dangerous, a woman with a specific and singular purpose, dressed up in a byline. 2 years ago, her brother Marco had walked into a meeting with a source who claimed to have evidence of organized crime connections within the NYPD, and had never walked out. The official report said he died in a car accident on the FDR Drive, single-vehicle collision. Tragic. Closed case. Arya had stood at Marco's empty coffin. Empty because the body had been too damaged for viewing, which was also, she'd come to believe, the first lie in a very long story. And made him a promise. She would find out what happened. She would find out who was responsible. And last month, after 2 years of dead ends and near misses, she'd found a thread that led, with maddening indirection, to the Salvatore family. The Gala had been step 1. Get in the room. Get eyes on Dante Salvatore. Photograph the men around him. Begin mapping his structure. She had not planned to sit in his seat. She most certainly had not planned to spend 4 hours in his orbit, drinking his champagne, sparring with his intelligence, and feeling the terrifying pull of something she refused to name. And she absolutely had not planned for what happened at 1:47 a.m., approximately 9 hours after the gala. She'd been asleep for 2 hours when the sound woke her. Not loud, which was somehow worse. A careful, deliberate sound. The soft defeat of her apartment's lock. She was on her feet and reaching for the taser she kept in her nightstand drawer before the light in her hallway flicked on. Luca Moretti stood in her bedroom doorway. He looked somehow neither apologetic nor threatening, simply professional, like a man delivering a package. "Mr. R. Salvatore requests your presence," he said. Arya pointed the taser at him. "Get out of my apartment. Miss Montclair, I have your face on 6 different cameras in this building and I will call the police in approximately 30 seconds. Luca's expression didn't change. "Mr. Salvatore was informed of your investigation materials approximately 20 minutes ago." The floor dropped out from under her. The wall. Someone had been in here before Luca. Someone had photographed the wall, her 2 years of work, her connections to the Salvatore name, and sent it to Dante. She kept the taser raised. Her breathing stayed even. "Barely. A car is waiting," Luca said. The Salvatore estate sat on 11 acres in Westchester. Stone gates, iron fencing, gardens that were beautiful and orderly in the way of things that existed to demonstrate control rather than joy. The house itself was a fortress, dressed as a manor. Georgian architecture, security cameras at every sightline, and men with earpieces stationed with the casual thoroughness of a military operation. Arya was brought to a study on the 2nd floor that was clearly Dante's domain. Dark wood, shelves of books that had actually been read, and a desk that held nothing except a single lamp and her external hard drive. Anna Karenina, she thought. Damn. Dante stood at the window with his back to her. He'd changed from the Gala, dark trousers, a black shirt with the collar open, sleeves folded to the elbow. He looked less like a man who attended charity events and more like what he actually was. He turned. She'd been cataloging his face all night, memorizing it for the write-up she was building in her head. She'd noted the strong lines of it, the dark eyes, the quality of stillness he carried. She'd been clinical about it. She was having trouble being clinical now, in the 3 a.m. quiet of his study, with her heart doing something embarrassing in her chest. "Sit," he said. "I prefer to stand." "Sit, Arya." His voice saying her name. It did something to the word, made it sound owned. She sat. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to think. and thinking was easier when she wasn't using energy on defiance. He placed the external hard drive on the desk between them. 2 years, he said. My name appears in 47 of your photographs, my uncle in 19. 4 members of my organization's financial structure, and 1 victim, a man named Margot Montclair, whose death investigation was officially closed and who you clearly don't believe is dead. He knew everything. My brother, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Something moved in his expression. Brief, deep, and quickly controlled. I didn't kill your brother. Someone in your world did. That, he said quietly, may be true. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected denial. Fury. She'd had responses ready for both. Then you understand why I'm here, she said. I understand that you walked into my orbit deliberately. He studied her. I also understand that you're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the least self-aware. Maybe both. The ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Something more careful and more real. You'll stay here, he said. She stood. That's not... Whoever killed your brother knows you've been investigating. If you went to the Meridian last night with that drive in your possession and asked enough questions to end up in my seat, his voice dropped. Then they know your name by now. This building is the safest place in New York, or the most dangerous. For you. He met her eyes. No. I've decided that. She looked at him for a long moment. The hard drive sat between them, 2 years of her life. Her brother's ghost, shaped in red string and late-night obsession. And if I refuse, she said, the drive stays with me either way. He picked it up and pocketed it with a casualness that made her teeth clench. The question is whether you're inside these walls voluntarily or because Luca locks the doors. You can't just... I own this city, Arya. He said it without arrogance. Just fact. The kind that couldn't be argued. Which means I own the safety inside it. And whether you like it or not, I'm deciding yours. She crossed her arms, the silk of her borrowed robe. Someone had provided clothes, which was its own infuriating statement of power, felt cold against her skin. I'm not your possession, she said. He looked at her across the lamplight with those black eyes that seemed to hold entire, complicated worlds she hadn't been given maps to. Not yet, he said, but you're mine to protect, Miss Montclair. Whether you accept that is entirely up to you. She lay awake in a room that cost more than her monthly rent until 5 a.m., telling herself she was planning her escape. She wasn't planning her escape. By day, the Salvatore estate revealed its architecture of power with quiet, ruthless clarity. Arya spent the morning observing, because she was a journalist, and observation was a reflex she couldn't switch off even in gilded captivity. By 10 a.m., she had counted 3 shifts of security personnel, identified what appeared to be a dedicated communications room on the ground floor east wing, noted that the kitchen staff moved with the relaxed efficiency of people who had worked here long enough to feel safe, and cataloged the movement patterns of 5 distinct men whose purpose was clearly not domestic. She had also discovered that the library was unlocked. The kitchen would feed her anything she requested, and the Wi-Fi password was written on a card in the nightstand drawer, with the kind of confidence of someone who was very sure you weren't leaving. She connected her phone and began building her notes from memory. What she knew about Dante Salvatore, professionally. The Salvatore family had controlled the northeastern seaboard's organized crime infrastructure for 40 years. Dante's father, Enzo Salvatore, had built the empire. Dante had inherited it at 19, after Enzo was killed at a dinner table. A detail that had appeared in exactly one buried federal document Arya had obtained through a contact at the DOJ. He had been, according to every intelligence assessment she'd found, methodically brilliant. He had restructured the family's operation away from drugs, too much federal attention, and toward construction contracts, port logistics, and financial services. Clean on paper, ruthless underneath. He was also, by all accounts, the kind of man who made enemies disappear, which was why Marco's name appearing in documents connected to Salvatore financial architecture had frozen Arya's blood the night she'd found it. She was sitting with a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for that had appeared beside her laptop anyway, when Dante walked into the library at 10:30. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid, low Italian, and crossed to the window without appearing to register her presence. She registered his. It was unavoidable. The way he filled a room, the particular quality of his attention even when directed elsewhere. The Italian was fluent and cold, and delivered with the economy of someone accustomed to being obeyed without repetition. He ended the call. Turned to her with that unreadable expression. "Rossi hit one of our distribution centers last night," he said. "6 men in the hospital, 1 critical." She kept her face neutral. "Sebastian Rossi, you know the name. I'm a journalist who investigates organized crime. I know all the names." He sat across from her, not in the nearest chair but in the larger one positioned at a slight angle, a choice that gave him sightline to both the door and her simultaneously. The habit was so practiced, she doubted he noticed it anymore. "What do you know about Rossi?" he asked. She considered how much to offer. She was still here on uncertain terms, neither prisoner nor guest, balanced on something that hadn't been defined yet. Information was currency, and she was already running a deficit. "That he's been making moves on Salvatore territory for 18 months, she said. "That he's younger than you, more reckless, and has a pattern of using leverage rather than violence as a primary tactic. Photographs, financials, compromised people." She paused. "He collects people, Salvatore. He finds what someone values and he holds it." Dante looked at her steadily. "That matches our intelligence." "Also," she said carefully, "Marco was investigating Rossi. Before he died, or," she corrected herself quietly, "before whatever happened to him happened, his last source was connected to Rossi's operation." Something shifted in Dante's expression, carefully, almost invisibly. "Why would your brother's investigation intersect with Rossi and produce documents connected to my name?" he asked. "Because Rossi isn't operating in a vacuum," she said. "Someone in your organization has been feeding him information, financial structures, movement schedules. My brother found the thread. I think he got close enough that someone decided to remove him. And you think that someone is mine." "I think the money trail leads to Salvatore accounts," she said. "I don't know if the order came from inside or outside. That's what I'm trying to determine." He was quiet for a long moment. The morning light from the windows fell across the angles of his face. "I had a man run a full audit of our financial architecture 6 months ago," he said quietly. 3 accounts showed irregular movement, small amounts, patterned. He paused. "I haven't identified the source." "Someone inside is bleeding information to Rossi," she said. "And I think they've been doing it for 2 years." The silence between them carried weight. She could see him running the calculation, the same one she had been running for months, approaching from a different direction. 2 separate investigations colliding in the library of a Westchester estate at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "You expected a scared woman who stumbled into the wrong seat. I expected someone to remove quickly." His dark eyes held hers. "You're considerably more complicated. And what does that mean for—" She stopped, because his phone had buzzed, and he glanced at it, and the controlled expression on his face had gone very still in a particular way she hadn't seen before. Not angry. Not calculating. Something colder. Something that looked, briefly, like fear, which she was almost certain Dante Salvatore was not supposed to be capable of. "What?" she said. He turned the phone to show her. A single photograph, time-stamped 45 minutes ago. The exterior of the Meridian Grand Hotel. The side entrance near the valet station. A man in a gray coat photographing the hotel. His face angled away from the camera, but his build, his shoes, the particular ring on his right hand, they matched a face from Aria's own files. One of Rossi's men. "He was there last night," Dante said. His voice had gone very quiet. "At the Gala." Aria felt the cold settle at the base of her spine. "He photographed the exits," Dante continued, "and the arrivals. Which means, he saw me," Aria said. "He saw me with you." The room felt smaller. Dante stood, and for a moment he was something barely contained, all that carefully banked force pressing against the controlled surface of him. Then it settled, smoothed, became the terrifying calm again. They're watching, he said simply. And somewhere in the city that belonged to him, someone was already moving. He didn't sleep that night. She knew because she didn't either. And at 2 a.m., when she gave up the pretense of rest and drifted, barefoot, through the dark hallway toward the kitchen, she found him already there. He was standing at the counter with a glass of whiskey he hadn't been drinking, staring at the middle distance, with the expression of a man fighting a war entirely behind his eyes. He looked up when she appeared. He didn't speak. She filled a glass of water, stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island, and said nothing, because silence was sometimes the most honest language. After a moment, he said, "I was 19 when my father was killed." She went very still. "He was shot at the dinner table," Dante said. "I was sitting across from him." There was no warning, no discussion. Someone sent 5 men through the service entrance and it was over in under a minute. She set her glass down quietly. "Dante, I don't tell people that." He said it without emotion, as if reporting a weather condition. "I'm telling you because you asked me once, last night, if I understood what it was to lose someone you couldn't protect." She hadn't asked that, not aloud, but apparently she hadn't needed to. "I was supposed to attend that dinner," he said. "My father wanted me there. I was late, an hour late, for a reason I no longer remember. If I had been on time, you'd be dead." "Yes." His jaw tightened slightly. "Or I'd have done something to prevent it and gotten us both killed. I've spent 15 years deciding which version would have been worse." She came around the island, not rushing it, slowly, giving him every opportunity to rebuild the wall. He didn't. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the tightness around his eyes that had nothing to do with anger. "My brother used to make terrible coffee," she said. "Every morning. He'd use twice the grounds and then act confused when it tasted like motor oil." Something shifted in Dante's face. "The morning before his source meeting," she continued, "he made coffee and I complained about it and he laughed and I—" She stopped briefly. "I didn't tell him to be careful. I thought I'd see him for dinner." Dante set down his whiskey glass. "Aria," he said, and it was the first time her name had sounded like something other than an assessment. She looked up at him. The kitchen was dark, except for the under-cabinet lights, amber and warm, and in the quiet of it she could hear her own heartbeat making choices she hadn't authorized. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "You're potentially connected to my brother's disappearance, and I'm potentially a threat to your operation, and we are literally the worst possible combination of—" He cupped her face in one hand. It wasn't a violent gesture. It wasn't even particularly possessive by his standards. It was careful, almost reverent, the way someone handles something they've decided, privately, to keep safe. His thumb brushed along her cheekbone, and the touch was so unexpected in its gentleness that her sentence dissolved completely. "I know," he said quietly. He bent his head, paused, giving her the space to step back, which she noted even as she absolutely did not use it. Then he kissed her. Slow, deliberate. Like learning a language for the first time. His hand was still cradling her face, and his other had found the counter behind her, not caging, just steadying, and she felt the warmth of him like something that had been cold inside her for 2 years, finding a heat source. She kissed him back. And that was when it became something entirely different. The gentleness lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then she made a small sound against his mouth. Frustration or hunger or the accumulated weight of 2 years of loneliness cracking open all at once. And he answered it with a low sound that lived in. His chest and the hand at her face moved into her hair, and the kiss became fierce and honest and devastating. She gripped the front of his shirt. He pressed her back against the counter. No space between them anymore, none of the careful distance they'd been maintaining. Just this heat and truth, and the terrifying relief of it. When they finally broke apart, breathing uneven, foreheads nearly touching. She heard him say something in Italian. Low, private, not meant for her to fully catch. But she caught enough. Non ti lascerò andare. I won't let you go. Dante, she started. Don't, he said. His voice was rough. His hand was still in her hair. Don't reason it away. Not tonight. She breathed. Once. Twice. I'm still investigating, she said. I know. I'm still going to find out what happened to Marco. I know that too. His thumb moved along her jaw. One slow pass, possessive and tender in equal measure. And when you do, I'm going to help you burn whoever is responsible to the ground. She looked up at him. You mean that, she said. Not a question. I'll burn the world for you, he said. If it comes to that. She believed him. That was the most terrifying thing of all. She found the file by accident. She'd been in the study, Dante's study, where she'd begun conducting her work with his reluctant permission, when the secondary monitor displayed a notification from a financial audit folder she hadn't been deliberately accessing, a glitch. An open tab from Dante's own investigation that she shouldn't have been able to see. She shouldn't have looked. She looked. The name at the top of the audit trail was Marcus Bianchi. Her blood went cold. Marcus Bianchi was Dante's head of security. She'd met him twice in 4 days. A compact, careful man with military bearing and eyes that assessed everything in the room before settling. She'd clocked him as intelligent and loyal and had essentially dismissed him from her threat calculations because he was so thoroughly embedded in Dante's infrastructure that implicating him had seemed almost impossible. The audit trail told a different story. 37 irregular transactions over 22 months. Small figures. Never more than 15,000 at a time, which kept them below the internal threshold that would trigger automatic review. The destination accounts were layered behind 2 shell companies, but the layering followed a pattern she recognized. She'd seen this architecture before in her own research files. It was Rossi's money structure. Marcus Bianchi was bleeding Salvatore financials directly to Sebastian Rossi. She was staring at the screen, very carefully not moving, when Dante walked in. He read her face before she could compose it. She'd noticed that about him, the unsettling accuracy of his attention to her, the way he seemed to track her emotional weather with a precision that felt intimate and invasive in equal measure. You found something, he said. She turns a monitor toward him. She watched him read it. She watched the quality of his stillness change, becoming denser, more dangerous, the stillness of a loaded weapon rather than a resting one. His jaw set. His eyes went flat in a way that she was coming to understand, considerably more frightening than anger. Marcus, he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of something solidifying. 22 months, she said carefully. He was with me in Chicago when the Rossi meeting started. His voice was very quiet. He helped design the protocols I put in place to find the leak. He paused. He's been watching me look for him. She stood. Dante, if he knows I found this, he doesn't, yet. He moved to the desk, picked up his phone, and sent a single text message with 3 taps. Luca is pulling Marcus's access cards. Quietly. And then? Then Marcus and I will have a conversation? The tone of his voice left no room for misunderstanding about the nature of that conversation. She rounded the desk. Before you do, what about Rossi? If Marcus tips him that you've identified the leak, he can't tip anyone. I've had his phone cloned for 2 weeks. For the first time, a very thin edge of dark satisfaction entered his voice. I was waiting to see where the thread led. You already suspected him. I suspected a close ring member. Marcus was on the list. He looked at her. Your financial analysis narrowed it. You're better at this than 3 of my own people. She ignored the compliment because there was something else pressing against her chest. Rossi uses leverage, she said. That's his pattern. If Marcus has been feeding him information, maybe Marcus wasn't entirely willing. She paused. And if Rossi collects people? The realization landed in both of them at the same moment. Marco. Dante said. If Rossi found my brother before Marco could publish his investigation. Her voice was very steady, which was the only way she could manage this. If he took him instead of killing him, he'd have leverage over anyone who loved Marco. Dante set down the phone with careful deliberation, including you. And if he's been watching me investigate, he's been waiting, Dante said, for you to get close enough to be useful. The study felt very cold suddenly. "He wanted me to find you," she said. "He wanted me in your orbit because that puts me in a position to be used against me." His expression was stone. "He couldn't buy me or break me, so he's manufacturing a weapon from the one thing I can't." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "The one thing you can't what?" she said. He met her eyes. In the bleak, clear honesty of that moment, the carefully maintained distance he still maintained between acknowledgement and admission collapsed entirely. "The one thing I can't be indifferent to," he said. She stared at him. Betrayal suspected, she thought. Not from outside. From everywhere. The restaurant was in Midtown, Salvatore owned, 4-star, and Dante had been eating there on Thursdays for 11 years. A known location. A fixed schedule. Which was, she would think later, exactly the point. They were at the private table in the back, curved booth, solid walls on 3 sides, sight lines to the floor, and she was in the middle of explaining that Marco's last article draft, which she'd found encoded in a cloud backup he'd set up for her in case of emergency, contained a specific reference to a Rossi holding facility. 3 things happened simultaneously. The lights went out. Glass shattered from the direction of the front entrance. Dante's hand closed around her arm and moved her. Fast, fluid, no hesitation. Under the table, his body between her and the room, as the unmistakable sound of gunfire lit up the darkness. It was over in 20 seconds. She counted them. Journalist's reflex. When the lights came back. Emergency generator. She looked up from behind Dante's solid wall of presence and assessed the room. 2 of Rossi's men were down near the entrance. A third was being restrained by Luca and another of Dante's people. The restaurant's front windows were destroyed. 3 waitstaff were behind the bar, unharmed. 2 of Dante's men were bleeding, non-critical. She registered mechanically. And Dante was standing in front of her with a gun she hadn't seen him draw, and an expression that had stripped away every layer of controlled civility until there was nothing left but the absolute, animal bedrock of what he was. He was checking her. Hands, arms, face, rapid, efficient. "I'm fine," she said. "You're certain?" "Dante, I'm fine." He turned to Luca. The instruction he delivered was 3 words. Luca's face went carefully neutral. The face of a man who was going to obey something that would require discretion afterward. The restrained man began talking. Rapidly. In Italian she only partially followed, but she caught enough. "Rossi sent us. We were supposed to take the woman." "The woman. Not kill her. Take her." Dante crossed the room in 4 strides. He crouched in front of the restrained man and said something very quietly, his back to her. She couldn't hear the words. She could see the man's face. She had interviewed people in war zones. She had spoken to survivors of cartel violence and domestic atrocities and the particular grinding horror of white-collar crime that destroyed families from the inside. She had a tolerance for human darkness that had been built through years of bearing witness. The expression on that man's face still made her look away. Dante stood, turned back to her, and in the practiced, unhurried way of someone who does not permit themselves to be visibly shaken, he straightened his jacket, walked to her, and took her face in his hands with the same careful tenderness as the night in the kitchen. He was searching for something in her expression. She thought perhaps it was fear of him, the monster she'd just seen him become. The thing without mercy that lived under the controlled surface. She looked back at him steadily. "You knew that would happen," she said. "I suspected," he said. "It was a calculated risk. I needed to confirm that Rossi would move tonight. I was the bait." "No." His jaw was tight. "You were never the bait. You were supposed to be 3 times more protected than you were, and I will have extensive words with the 2 men who failed to prevent that entrance being breached." "And them?" She gestured toward the 2 men on the floor. He looked at her, long and direct and without apology. "They won't report back to Rossi," he said. She absorbed this. The journalist in her filed it. The woman in her, the one who had spent a week in this man's company and 2 hours the night before in his arms. didn't flinch. How many people has Rossi taken, Dante? Enough to constitute a problem that needs ending, including my brother. The word hung there. He didn't confirm, but he didn't deny. I think Marco's alive, she said. It came out steadier than it had any right to. I've thought it for months, but I couldn't believe it because it was easier to grieve a death than to live with the possibility of Arya. If he's alive, I'm gonna find him. Her voice held. And if Rossi has him, then Rossi is going to answer to me. His hands were still cupping her face. The warmth of them was the only warm thing in the ruined restaurant. I swear to you, on my father's blood, on everything I am, Rossi will answer for this. He'll try again, she said. He'll keep trying. Let him. The dark eyes held absolute certainty. You're mine to protect, Arya. Let me make you understand what that means. She kissed him. She initiated it, stepped forward into him, hands gripping his lapels, and kissed him with the desperate, honest ferocity of a woman who was done pretending this was tactical. He caught her, arms around her, one hand at the back of her head, pulling her into him like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Mine, he said against her mouth. You're mine. Mine, she answered. You're mine too. Outside, the city hummed and roared and moved in its enormous, indifferent way. And in the wreckage of his restaurant, surrounded by the evidence of a war that was only beginning, Dante Salvatore and Arya Montclair made each other a silent, unbreakable promise. Let it come, whatever came next. They would face it together. The war arrived on a Tuesday, the way disasters always do, disguised as an ordinary morning. Arya was in the East Wing study, cross-referencing Marco's encoded files with the Rossi financial architecture when the blast hit. Not the estate. 2 miles away, Salvatore Docklands, Pier 47, which handled a significant portion of the legitimate port logistics that formed the legal surface layer of the empire. She felt it as a concussive echo in the window glass, a pressure change, a thrumming in the walls. 5 seconds later, Dante's phone began its particular pattern of rapid succession calls. She watched his face while he took 3 of them standing, moving to the window, voice dropping into that cold, rapid Italian. She didn't need to ask. She could read the architecture of catastrophe in the set of his shoulders. Rossi, she said when he lowered the phone. A truck at Pier 47. His voice was controlled. The device was professional, military grade. Casualties. 4 dead, 7 in critical condition. He paused. Luca's brother was running the overnight shift. The air left the room. She had met Luca's brother once, a younger, less contained version of Luca. Easy laugh, dark eyes, apprenticing in logistics. 23 years old. Is he critical? Dante was already moving to his desk, to a second phone. He's in surgery. She watched him activate a response that was terrifyingly efficient. Calls made, positions deployed, the quiet machinery of a private army being brought to readiness. There was no wasted motion, no visible emotion, no pause for the grief she knew was in him somewhere beneath the operational ice. This was what command looked like in his world. You held the grief down with both hands, and you moved. She thought of Marco, of the practiced architecture of her own buried grief. She understood the mechanics of it, even here. At noon, Luca arrived. He had blood on his sleeve, not his own, and his face was doing the same thing Dante's was, performing control over a seismic interior event. Dante gripped his shoulder. One hand. Brief. No words. Luca nodded. That was the whole of it. She had to look away. The afternoon brought 3 more incidents. A Salvatore construction site in Brooklyn tagged with Rossi's mark. 2 of their city council contacts receiving photographs they shouldn't have had access to, and a car following Sienna Walsh, Arya's best friend, Arya's emergency contact, the person whose number was saved in Arya's phone as simply Sai. Arya saw the surveillance report and went very still. He's mapping my connections, she said. Yes, Dante was at the window. He hadn't stopped moving since morning. Constant, controlled motion, managing his war the way she imagined a chess grandmaster managed an endgame, 3 moves ahead, expression giving nothing away. He's going to use Sienna. She's already been moved. My men picked her up an hour ago. She's at a secondary location, secure. Arya released a breath she'd been holding for 2 hours. He's escalating, she said. He's trying to force your hand. He wants me to respond in force. Something public, something that brings federal attention down on us while he positions himself as the aggrieved party. Dante turned from the window. He wants me making mistakes. Are you? He looked at her. Long, level. No. What's the response? Surgical. He crossed to the desk. Marcus has been in a secure location since yesterday. We have everything we need from his phone. Rossi's holding facility he paused, for leverage assets as a warehouse complex in Red Hook. We go tonight. Her heart rate spiked. Marco, we don't know for certain, but it's possible. He met her eyes. It's possible. She stood. I'm coming. Absolutely not. Dante, listen to me. He crossed to her. His hands took her arms. Firm, not gentle this time. The face above her was the Dawn's face, and she had come to understand the difference. I need my full attention on the operation tonight. I cannot have my full attention on the operation if you are anywhere near Rossi's men. I won't be, if they get their hands on you. His voice dropped. If Rossi gets you specifically, he wins, not because of what he'll do to you. Because of what I'll do. Every calculation goes out. Every plan dissolves. I become exactly the reckless, compromised man he needs me to be. She stared at him. The admission sat between them, enormous and vulnerable, nothing like the controlled man who had poured her champagne at a charity gala a week ago. Stay, he said. Here. With Luca's men. I'll be back by morning. She searched his face. Promise me, she said. His jaw tightened. Men like him didn't make promises they couldn't guarantee. She knew that. He knew she knew it. I'll come back, he said. The closest he could give her. She kissed him. Quick. Fierce. Her hands gripping the front of his shirt. Come back to me, she said against his mouth. He left at 9 p.m. At 11:40 p.m. the east wing window detonated inward. She had exactly 3 seconds of warning. A sound. A shadow. The instinctive animal drop of her stomach. Before the flash. The shock of concussive air. And then the specific, suffocating darkness of a hood being pulled over her head. Not an explosion meant to kill. A breach meant to extract. Rossi. She'd been the distraction. The operation in Red Hook had been the distraction. She was the target all along. Dante, she thought, with a clarity that pierced through the fear. They separated us. Then the darkness swallowed everything. The room smelled of river water and rust. Concrete floor, corrugated metal walls, a single bulb on a wire. The particular underground cold of a space that never received sunlight. Arya had been conscious for approximately 40 minutes when Sebastian Rossi walked in. He was not what she'd expected. She'd assembled a picture of him from intelligence reports, financial trails, and 4 years of crime desk research. Mid-40s, former Sicilian family, New York transplant, ruthless operator. She'd imagined someone older and rawer. Sebastian Rossi was 41 and looked like a professor of European literature. Clear brown eyes, silver at his temples, the careful, symmetrical face of a man who'd cultivated a surface specifically designed to disarm. She recognized the performance because she'd used a version of it herself. Her wrists were bound behind her. She was seated. She'd assessed the room during the 40 minutes. One door, hinged outward, likely guarded from the outside. The single light meant the bulb couldn't be used as a weapon without leaving herself in darkness. 3 surveillance cameras, one dead, she'd noted from the unblinking, non-reactive LED. Potentially useful. She regulated her breathing. This was not the first time she'd been in a room where the air carried threat. She'd spent 6 hours in a cartel-adjacent situation in Juarez 3 years ago while reporting. Waiting for a handler who didn't arrive, she had learned, under duress, that the most valuable thing she possessed was her mind. And minds work best at operational temperature, not panic temperature. Miss Montclair, Rossi said. settling into the fold-in chair positioned across from her with the ease of a man conducting a job interview. "I've been looking forward to this." "Flattering," she said. "You could have simply emailed." His mouth curved. "I like you already. Dante has excellent taste. Do you want something specific, or is this introductory?" He tilted his head. "Your investigative files. The full archive, not the version on the external drive Dante has. The original, the cloud backup your brother configured." Her pulse stayed even. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. "The encoded backup Marco set up for you. October, 2 years ago. He was very thorough, your brother, also very careful." He paused. "He's been telling us about it for 18 months. Her stomach dropped. Then she controlled it, locked it down. Marco had been under duress for 18 months. Anything he'd said had been extracted under conditions she didn't permit herself to fully imagine. "He told you about a backup," she said. "He didn't give you access because he couldn't. He encoded it using a passphrase only I know." She kept her voice neutral. "Which is why you need me." "Correct." Rossi uncrossed his legs and leaned forward slightly. "The files contain evidence that has the potential to create significant structural damage to the Salvatore organization. Evidence Marco gathered before he came into our care. Evidence you've been using to investigate, but which you clearly intend to take public, rather than use the way Marco was supposed to use it." The way he was supposed to. He was recruited as an asset before he understood the full scope of the arrangement, Rossi said with mild regret. He then developed inconveniently strong objections. Marco is, if nothing else, a man of principle. It's rather exhausting. She was breathing. In and out. Steady. Marco was recruited, then held. He's alive. He's here. Keep talking. Keep him talking. Dante is looking. "What do you want with the files specifically?" she said. "The sections relating to Salvatore's port logistics, and the sections relating to Antonio Salvatore's personal communications." Antonio. Dante's uncle. "Those sections implicate Antonio," she said slowly, "not Dante. Dante's uncle made several arrangements 2 years ago that Dante is not aware of." Rossi's voice was pleasant and precise. "He sold your brother's information to me in exchange for protection of certain business interests. He arranged for Marco's removal before Marco could expose him." He paused. "He also, incidentally, has been feeding me intelligence on Dante's operation through Marcus Bianchi, who Antonio recruited to that role 2 years ago." The architecture of it clicked into place. It wasn't Rossi using Dante's family. It was Dante's family using Rossi. Antonio Salvatore was the architect. Rossi was the instrument. Marcus was the conduit, and Marco had found it. Found Antonio's betrayal from the inside, which was why he'd had to disappear. She looked at Rossi very steadily. "You're telling me this because you want me to understand what you're holding over Dante? I'm telling you this because you're going to give me the files, and when you do, you'll want to understand what you've handed over." He stood. "Think about it tonight. I'll return in the morning." He left. The door closed. The bolt shot home. She sat in the silence for 30 seconds. Then she began working on the zip ties at her wrists, methodically, using a technique she'd learned in a self-defense course she'd taken 3 years ago after a Juarez, which had seemed excessive at the time and now seemed like the most sensible thing she'd ever done. While she worked, she thought, Antonio Salvatore. He built Dante's world, and he's been selling it. She thought of Dante. That careful, brutal, tender, complicated man. Discovering that the betrayal hadn't come from a lieutenant or a rival. It had come from family. She kept working on the zip ties, and she thought, hold on, Dante, I'm not breaking. And somewhere in the dark city above her, she could felt it with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that he was coming, moving through the dark like a storm front, like the answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was saying. Almost too late, something whispered. Almost, she answered, but not quite. He found the second facility at 3014 a.m. The Red Hook warehouse had been a decoy. Rossi's men, a staged operation designed to pull Dante's force east while the real extraction happened west. He'd known it within 20 minutes of arriving at Red Hook, when the opposition was too thin and the resistance too performative. He'd felt the absence of her, the specific, howling wrongness of it, before Luca's call confirmed what the vibration in his chest already knew. He turned the convoy around. 14 men, 3 vehicles. Dante at the front with no jacket and a weapon in each hand, and the particular quality of stillness that his men had learned, over years, to recognize as the most dangerous version of him. Not anger, not fury, decision. He had made the decision the moment he understood she was taken. It had been clean and absolute and required no deliberation whatsoever. He would dismantle Rossi, brick by brick, man by man, until there was nothing left standing. The facility was an industrial complex near the water. 2 buildings, perimeter fencing, 6 external guards. He'd pulled the layout from a property database on the drive over. 4 corners first, he said to Luca. Already called, Luca said. 4 minutes. The exterior was cleared in 4 minutes. 2 of his men took minor wounds. The guards made varied choices. Some fought, some ran. One surrendered immediately and was given the specific mercy of being left unconscious rather than dead, which was all the mercy Dante was distributing tonight. The main building's ground floor, a corridor. 2 rooms, storage empty. A third. He heard her voice before he opened the door. Not calling for help. Not screaming. She was speaking, clearly, precisely, in the conversational tone of someone giving dictation. He opened the door. She was standing, wrists raw where restraints had been, in the center of the room, facing the dead surveillance camera with the active LED, speaking in a clear, deliberate voice. Transaction records for Antonio Salvatore dated November through March, cross-referenced with Rossi account structures provided by source. She was reciting her investigation findings to the dead camera, creating a record, directly to whatever cloud service would pick up the audio on her phone, which she'd somehow recovered and hidden and used while she had a connection to a signal, before they presumably took it. She was, in Dante's estimation, extraordinary. She turned at the sound of the door. 1 second of absolute shock. Then she crossed the room and walked straight into him. He caught her, both arms pulling her in completely, holding on with the uncalculated desperation of a man who had spent 6 hours knowing she was in danger and being unable to stop it. He pressed his face into her hair and simply held her, and something in his chest, the thing that had been wound tight since Luca's call, released with a violence that was entirely internal and entirely overwhelming. "I've got you," he said. His voice was not its usual controlled instrument. "I have you." "I know," she said against his neck. Her arms were tight around him. "I know you do." They held each other for 5 seconds. 10. Long enough that Luca discreetly positioned himself in the doorway with his back to them. Then she pulled back and her amber eyes were dry. She hadn't cried, he noted, with a complicated mixture of pride and something that ached, and she looked up at him and said, "It's Antonio." He went still. "Your uncle?" she said. "He's the one who sold Marco to Rossi. He recruited Marcus. He's been running Rossi as an instrument to dismantle your operation from the inside." She watched his face. He found out Marco had evidence of his private dealings, financial and otherwise, and he arranged Marco's removal before Marco could expose him. The information moved through him slowly, each word landing in its specific place. The architecture of a betrayal so deep and long-running that it had been invisible precisely because it came from inside the place he'd never thought to look, his father's brother. The man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral. Who had counseled him through the first brutal years of taking over the family, who had taught him patiently how to hold an empire, who had been, for 2 years at minimum, selling that empire piece by piece. "Marco," he said quietly. "Is he here?" Rossi said he's here. Rossi said he's here. Alive. He turned to Luca. 1 word. Luca moved. He looked back at Arya. He took her face in his hands. The gesture that had become its own language, that meant, "I see you. I have you. You are safe," and pressed his forehead to hers briefly. "I found you," he said. You're predictably dramatic about it, she said. Her voice finally cracked, just slightly, the smallest fracture in the composed surface. I was fine. You were magnificent, he said, but you're never doing that again. Let's discuss the never again later. Agreed. Luca's voice came from somewhere in the building. Dawn, you'll want to come. They found Marco in a room 2 doors down, a room that had been, clearly, someone's long-term involuntary residence. A cot, a small lamp, books that looked well-read, and a wall that Marco had used to keep his own record. Dates, names, details of conversations overhead. A map of Rossi's operation built from 2 years of captive observation. Marco Montclair was 32 years old. He was thinner than his photographs. His eyes, when he looked at Dante, held the complicated calculation of a man who has had a great deal of time to prepare for a moment, while simultaneously never believing it would arrive. Then he saw Aria. She made a sound that Dante had never heard before from her. Raw, cracked open, the sound of 2 years of grief and hope and terrible uncertainty colliding into relief too large to contain. And she moved past Dante and across the room, and Marco caught her, and they held each other in the bare bulb light of a room that had held him prisoner for 2 years. Dante looked away, gave them their moment. He looked at Marco's wall. The dates, the names, the painstaking documentation. One name appeared more than any other, circled in what appeared to be dried rust red. Not blood, he told himself, and then was not entirely sure, and underlined 3 times. Antonio Salvatore. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Aria, reunited with her brother, whole and fierce and alive. And he made a decision with the same clean, absolute quality as the one he'd made when he understood she'd been taken. Only this one was about justice, and it would wait until morning. Get everyone out, he said to Luca. We move in 1 hour. He looked at Aria once more over Marco's shoulder. She looked back at him with amber eyes that held everything. One of us might die tonight, he'd thought on the drive here. But not tonight. Not tonight. They didn't. Antonio Salvatore received them at his townhouse on the Upper East Side with the expression of a man who had been expecting this. That, somehow, was the worst of it. He was 67 years old and looked it more this morning than he usually did. The heavy, careful face of the Salvatore patriarch, gray at his temples, dark eyes that were Dante's eyes at a distance, and something entirely different up close. He wore a robe and held a coffee cup and looked at Dante standing in his foyer at 7 a.m. with Aria on one side, Marco on the other, and Luca blocking the door, and he simply lowered the cup. Dante, he said. You sold my father's brother's son's empire, Dante said, piece by piece, for 2 years, to Sebastian Rossi. Antonio said nothing. You had Marco Montclair removed when he found evidence of your financial dealings, specifically the accounts you've been running through Rossi's structure, the ones that allowed you to siphon Salvatore capital while appearing to protect it. Dante's voice was conversational, terribly conversational. You recruited Marcus Bianchi, who I trusted with the security of my house, and you allowed, permitted, encouraged a war between my family and Rossi that killed 4 of our men. Dante. Antonio's voice was careful. There are things about the family situation that you never had the full picture of, my father. Dante took 1 step forward. Tell me about my father. The coffee cup in Antonio's hand was very still. The men who killed my father at that dinner table, Dante said. You knew about it. Not a question. He'd known it. Somewhere below conscious thought, for years, had chosen not to know it, because Antonio was all the family he had. Because some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. You were in business with the Carranza family, Dante continued. Who wanted my father out? Who my father had refused to align with? You enabled the access. Your father was going to destroy what we built. He was building something better. Dante's voice remained even. He didn't want what Carranza was offering because it was poison. You didn't care. You wanted the money. I wanted the family to survive. You wanted it to survive so you could keep feeding from it. The evenness broke, briefly, into something under enormous pressure. You killed my father. You let me believe for 15 years it was an outside enemy. You watched me grieve and lead and bleed for this family, and you were the architect of everything that destroyed it." Antonia looked at him. The careful face cracked, and beneath it was not remorse, was something more complicated and older and colder. "You were never going to be what he was," Antonio said quietly. "I kept you alive long enough for that to stop mattering." Aria's hand found Dante's arm. It was a single, quiet gesture, not restraining, grounding. He looked at her. Those amber eyes, the woman who had sat in his seat and pulled 2 years of truth into the open with nothing but stubbornness and grief and extraordinary courage. He looked back at his uncle. "You have 2 options," Dante said. "Federal custody. Marco has documented everything, including your communications with Rossi. And that documentation will be delivered to the U.S. Attorney's office within the hour. You spend the rest of your life in a federal facility." Antonio went very still. "Or?" he said. "There is no or," Dante said. "There is only the first option. I'm not my father's killer. I'm not the monster you made me practice being." He paused. "You go to federal custody. You tell them what you know about Rossi's full operation. Every leverage asset he holds, every politician he's owned, every crime you participated in together. You burn it all down. And in exchange? In exchange, I don't give your body to the river." Silence. Luca opened the door. Antonio Salvatore, patriarch of his family's destruction, set down his coffee cup with the exhausted precision of a man setting down a burden he'd carried for 40 years. He looked briefly at Dante with something that might, in another life, have been pride. "You're better than I thought you'd be," Antonio said. "I know," Dante said. Sebastian Rossi was arrested at JFK Airport at 9:15 a.m., attempting to board a private flight to Zurich. The evidence package delivered to the U.S. attorney included 2 years of Rossi's financial records, a full accounting of his leverage operation, 12 people held in various forms of captivity across 3 facilities, and the communications archive Marcus Bianchi had unwittingly given them by keeping his cloned phone. Marcus was delivered to federal custody at 10 a.m. Antonio Salvatore walked into the federal building at 11, accompanied by his attorney, to begin the negotiations of the cooperation agreement that would dismantle, in the federal prosecutor's words, the most sophisticated organized crime leverage operation ever documented in the northeastern United States. Dante watched the news coverage from the study, Aria sitting across from him. Marco was at the hospital, checking out, relearning the weight of a city he hadn't walked freely in 2 years. Luca sat in the corner chair, not speaking, present in the way of someone who understood that presence was the only thing required of him. Aria looked at Dante across the desk where they'd first fought, where she'd first shown him her investigation, where the truth had slowly assembled itself from 2 separate lives, moving in parallel toward the same wound. "Is it over?" she said. He exhaled. "Slowly. The war," he said. "Yes. And the rest of it?" He looked at her. The man she saw, she had said this to him once, at 3 a.m. when they were both too tired to perform composure, was not the monster his uncle had tried to manufacture, was not the clean, cold, untouchable surface either, was something she had helped construct, or perhaps excavate, a man capable of justice as well as force, of tenderness as well as dominion. "The rest of it," he said quietly, "is just beginning." "It's finally over," she said. But she was smiling. Finally, he thought. And finally, starting. 8 weeks later, New York was different. Or perhaps it was the same, and they were different in it. The Salvatore operation had undergone the structural transformation Dante had been planning for 2 years, moving further from the territories that carried the most federal risk, consolidating the legitimate architecture, expanding the financial structures that operated in the clean light rather than the shadow. It was, his FBI contact told him with diplomatic ambiguity, a situation they were actively monitoring with considerable interest and cautious optimism, which translated, in the actual language of their relationship, to keep it clean and we'll leave you standing. Dante intended to keep it very clean. Marco had spent 3 weeks at Arya's apartment, the West 74th place she'd returned to after everything, because she was constitutionally incapable of accepting residence in a house that cost more than her annual salary, even if Dante was profoundly annoyed by this position. She was working on a comprehensive investigation of the leverage operation, which the U.S. attorney had cleared for publication once the federal case was secured. It would be, her editor had told her, the most significant piece of organized crime journalism in a decade. Sienna Walsh had been given the full story over approximately 4 hours and 2 bottles of wine, and had responded with the journalistic instincts of a woman who had covered crime alongside Arya for 6 years. "I want an interview." "Also, are you in love with him?" "Answer both questions honestly." Marco was undergoing what he called re-entry, and what Arya called him eating an unconscionable amount of real food and calling me 4 times a day. He was building a consulting practice around organized crime financial forensics. He had, in his first week of freedom, sent Dante Salvatore a 1-line email. "I heard you burned it all down. Thank you." And then a second email. 3 days later, "Take care of her or I'll investigate you myself." Dante had printed both emails and put them in his desk. He didn't examine why. The night he'd chosen was a Thursday, the same day of the week he'd eaten at the restaurant before Rossi's men destroyed the windows. He'd had it rebuilt. Better windows. He'd also arranged the table exactly as it had been. Center of the room. The private booth. Arya sat across from him in a dress the color of winter. Deep blue, which was different from the warning red of the Gala and felt like it meant something. And they were eating and she was talking about the article and he was watching her with the particular, complete attention he'd given very few things in his life. She noticed. She always noticed. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you look at me like I am a problem you've decided to keep." "You are a problem I've decided to keep," he said. She laughed. The laugh he'd been cataloging for 2 months. Surprised out of her. Genuine. The version that reached her eyes. He reached inside his jacket and set 3 things on the table. The first, a ring, not excessive. Not the kind of ring that announced itself from across a room, but substantial, old. A deep-cut diamond set in platinum that had been in his family for 4 generations. His father's, mother's ring. The only piece of jewelry Antonio had not gotten his hands on because Dante had taken it from the safe at 19 and worn it on a chain under his shirt ever since. The second, a small folded piece of paper. He pushed it toward her. She opened it and read what he'd written there. A list of names. The legitimate businesses the Salvatore name controlled, the foundations, the port operations, the development companies, and at the bottom, added in different ink, her name. Arya Salvatore, Chief Investigative Officer, Salvatore Holdings. She stared at it, her mouth opened and closed. "I need someone I trust absolutely in charge of internal audit," he said without inflection. "You're already better at it than anyone I employ. Dante." And the third thing. He set the gun on the table between them. Not pointed at her, laid flat. Clearly not a threat. She looked at it, then at him. "Mafia tradition," he said. "I make you an oath by blood or I tell you my intentions with the only other currency that means something in my world." He kept his eyes on hers. "I intend to protect you. I intend to stand beside you, not behind you, not in front of you. Beside you. I intend to build something with you that neither of us was capable of building alone." She looked at the ring, the paper, the gun. "This is the strangest proposal in human history," she said. "I'm an unusual man. You are absolutely an unusual man." Her voice was not quite steady. "Arya." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You sat in my seat at a gala because you were hunting me. You held a taser on my consigliere. You broke out of zip ties in a Rossi facility and recorded your investigation findings to a dead camera. You told me the truth when the truth was something no one else would have dared." He turned her hand over, laced his fingers through hers. "I have never been interested in a woman I couldn't respect. I have never, until you, been in the company of a woman I genuinely could not predict. Is that a compliment?" "It is the highest compliment I am capable of giving." She looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant was quiet around them. Luca was somewhere behind the bar, very deliberately not watching. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "I want the full byline on the article. My name, no restrictions. Done. I keep my apartment. You keep your apartment. He would buy the building." He didn't say this, and Marco gets a standing invitation to Sunday dinners at the estate, which I will be present for whether or not you've decided it's inconvenient. Non-negotiable from my side as well. He paused. "He emails me, did you know that?" She blinked. "Marco emails you?" "Twice. Once to thank me. Once to threaten me." Something that was close to warmth moved through his expression. "I like him." She stared at him. Then she picked up the ring. "Marry me," she said, "or I'll investigate you again." He took the ring from her hand and slid it onto her finger himself. "Aria Montclair," he said, his thumb resting over the ring on her hand, his eyes absolutely certain. "Marry me, or I'll kidnap you again." She looked at her hand. At the ring. At him. "We're going to be a complete disaster," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "We're going to be magnificent." 8 months later, the Meridian Grand Hotel had been built 112 years ago, and in all that time, not a single man had died inside its gilded walls. Aria Montclair. For approximately 6 more hours, the last time her name would carry only its original syllables, stood at the top of the marble staircase and looked down at the ballroom below. The same staircase. The same gilded ceiling. The same sweep of marble and golden light. 8 months ago, she had descended these stairs in borrowed red, carrying a mission, carrying 2 years of grief, carrying a pen that doubled as a hair accessory and a notepad she thought no one would notice. Tonight, she wore white. Not the elaborate confection of traditional wedding excess, but ivory silk that moved with her, cut clean and bold and without apology, because Aria Montclair had spent 2 years apologizing for nothing and had no intention of starting at her own wedding. Her hair was up, not with a ballpoint pen tonight. Sienna had seen to that with considerable theatrical triumph. And the only jewelry she wore was the ring on her left hand and Marco's silver chain, which she'd taken from around his neck at the rehearsal dinner when he'd slipped it back to her without a word. Her brother stood beside her at the top of the stairs. 8 months ago, she had thought he was dead. He was wearing a tux that fit poorly because he hadn't stopped gaining back weight since his release, and his eyes were doing the thing they did now, constantly assessing the room's security. A reflex he was learning to quiet, but when he looked at her, his eyes went soft in the way they had when they were children, and he used to tell her she could do anything, absolutely anything, if she just refused to stop. "You ready?" he said. "I've been ready for 2 years," she said. He offered his arm. They descended. Below, Dante Salvatore stood at the center of the room he had stood in 8 months ago and surveyed his empire. It looked somewhat different tonight. The usual cast of senators and judges and art dealers had been replaced by a crowd that was, to put it gently, more varied. Luca's family. Large, demonstrative, the kind of Italian-American family that cried at everything and treated a wedding like a cultural obligation and a personal celebration simultaneously. Sienna Walsh, who had already started crying during the florist's arrival that morning and showed no signs of stopping. 3 of Dante's most trusted men, wearing tuxedos with the rigid discomfort of people who were used to the suits they could move in freely. Marco's recovery group from the therapist's practice uptown, invited because Aria insisted and because Dante had discovered, to his own surprise, that he respected Marco's particular brand of quiet. Relentless survival. Luca appeared at his shoulder. Standard position. Standard expression. Though there was, tonight, a looseness around his eyes that Dante recognized as the specific emotion Luca only permitted himself on rare occasions. "You nervous?" Luca said. "No," Dante said. "I'm nervous," Luca said. "You've been nervous since the florist arrived. She was very late. She was 4 minutes late. In this family, 4 minutes is a statement." Dante looked at the staircase, and she appeared at the top of it, and the room did the thing it had done 8 months ago. That subtle, instinctive ripple of adjustment. but different now. Not fear, not careful neutrality, something warmer, the collective acknowledgement of something right. She came down the stairs on Marco's arm, and she was looking at him, and she was not nervous at all. Not his Arya, who had held a taser on a consigliere and broken out of zip ties and sat in the deadliest man's seat in New York and had the composure of someone who had learned, through extraordinary circumstances, that she was capable of surviving extraordinary circumstances. She came to him. Marco placed her hand in his, with the ceremony of a man who had been given the profound privilege of giving away the one person he loved most in the world and was handling it with everything he had. Dante held her hand. "You're late," he said quietly. She looked up at him, those amber eyes, that light scatter of freckles, the pendant she tucked inside her neckline again, their private continuity, their callback. "I'm exactly on time," she said. "For me," he said. "You were 8 months late. I've been waiting for you my entire life." She gripped his hand. The ceremony was conducted by a justice of the peace Arya had insisted upon, civil, clear, no performance. She had written her own vows in a single paragraph that had made Marco cry in the back row, and Sienna actually audibly sob. He had written his in a language that was half his native tongue and half the language she had taught him, which was the language of honesty and trust and the particular courage required to be known. "Non ti lascerò andare," he said. And then, in English, so she would have it in both, "I will not let you go. Not ever. Not again." "I won't let you go either," she answered. The journalist's precision, direct, unadorned, absolute. "You're mine. I'm yours. That's the whole oath." That was the whole oath. Later, much later, the reception winding into the small hours, the room soft with candlelight, and the particular warmth of an evening that had been exactly what it was supposed to be. Arya stood at the corner of table 12. She was looking at the center seat, the seat she'd sat in 8 months ago with her champagne and her borrowed red dress and her notepad and her 2-year mission. She felt him before he appeared beside her. She always did now. That particular quality of warmth, of weight, of the air carrying a different quality when he was near. "You're thinking about the seat," he said. "I'm thinking about the night I sat in it." "And?" She looked at the chair for a long moment. Then she looked at him. At this man she had found at the end of a 2-year investigation into everything she'd lost. This man who had held her in a kitchen at 3 a.m. and promised to burn the world for her, and had meant it literally. This man who emailed with her brother, who had given justice for her family's grief, who had learned, slowly, imperfectly, with the terrible vulnerability of someone who had kept themselves guarded for 15 years, to let someone in. "I'm thinking," she said, "that it was the best mistake I ever made." He looked at the seat too, then back at her. Then, with the ghost of something she had come to know was his version of pure, unguarded joy, he pulled out the chair. "Sit," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Is it reserved?" "Always," he said. "For you," she sat. He sat beside her. The head position. The one that gave him sightlines to every entrance and exit. The one he'd occupied his entire adult life. And he took her hand on the table between them, and the room moved around them the way the city moved around him. Enormous and indifferent and full of stories. They had 1 year of theirs behind them. They had the rest of their lives ahead. On her phone, set to silent, face down. Because tonight was not for work. A single notification arrived from the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning and photographed and sent to Sienna with a message that said, "I need you to tell me if I'm seeing this correctly." Sienna had sent back a single response. 2 lines, Arya. 2 Linus. She hadn't told him yet. She would tell him in the car, on the way home, when the city was dark and full and moving around them. She would watch his face do the thing it did. The controlled surface cracking open to show what lived underneath. The man she was the only one alive who had ever seen. The man she had sat in the wrong seat to find. But for now, in the golden light of a room 112 years old, with the ring warm on her finger and his hand wrapped around hers, and the city sprawling endlessly outside the tall windows, she turned to Dante Salvatore, her husband, her counterpart, the monster who had learned to feel. and she was perfectly, completely still, content, home. He turned to her, read her face with that accuracy she'd long since stopped being surprised by. "What?" he said softly. She shook her head slightly. "Nothing, everything." He lifted her hand, pressed his mouth to her knuckles, her ring, each separate truth held in her fingers. "Tutto," he said. "Everything." His dark eyes were certain and warm and entirely hers. "Tu sei tutto." You are everything. Outside, New York glittered and roared and carried its thousands of unwritten stories through the dark. Inside, at the center of a room full of light, two people who had found each other through grief and obsession and one very consequential wrong seat held on to each other with the particular strength of those who know exactly what they almost lost. And the city that had always belonged to him gained something new. Not a queen beside its king. A partner. Equally dangerous, equally devoted. Entirely irreplaceable. Forever bound.